Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us, Crappy Mondays, and welcome to a special edition of the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by two sturdy campaigners from the nuclear veteran community, Alan Owen of Labrats and descendant Steve Pearce. Afternoon, both. Thank you for joining,
Hello.
Especially you, Alan, because I know you are jet lagged and having freshly flown in from the States. We'll get onto that a bit later. But if Alan looks like he's dozing off, everybody, it's okay. Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments. Give us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening on podcast are just going to have to punch the wall or something. Not a family member, please. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed this morning on the 5th anniversary of the arrival of the COVID pandemic on these shores, with families gathering to reflect and promise that we must never forget all the many things that went wrong with the government handling of it. Now, speaking of things that must never be forgotten, and because of our guests, we're not going to discuss the paper in detail. But today, we're going to take a deep dive into the Nuked Blood Scandal, which is something I and the Mirror have been investigating over the past 2 or 3 years. Now, for those who don't know, this is evidence of medical monitoring of troops taking part in Cold War nuclear weapons tests. There were orders for them to be checked for evidence of radiation entering their bodies using blood and urine tests and x-rays before, during and after the periods that they were likely to have been exposed. Now, unless those men were aware of the reasons for those checks and the risks involved in it, they could not provide informed consent. It would mean that these were inhumane experiments on our own troops using radiation. It's very serious stuff. Now, many veteran families have discovered that the records of this monitoring is no longer in their medical files, parts of which have inexplicably gone missing or are being unlawfully withheld from them. Now, Steve, you're one of those who has a legal right to access your father's medical records. You have genetic conditions that could be related to his service. So does your son. That is enough in the law to have access to his medical records. Not only that, but your mum, Jackie, as his widow, has a right to access her late husband's medical records as well. So can you just tell us, where and how your dad served? And also, obviously, they've given you these records straight away at the first time of asking, haven't they?
No. Yeah, my dad served in Maralinga in South Australia, where there were 7 nuclear explosions, weapons that were actually detonated. And Dad came along a few years later, where not only had those 7 bombs been detonated, but around 600 minor trials were done. Now, these minor trials sound quite minor, but they weren't. They were some of the most toxic experiments ever done on this planet, and they involved doing things like blowing plutonium and beryllium and all these nasty things up with conventional explosives to mimic what would happen if there was fires and crashes involving aircraft carrying nuclear weapons. So the ground that my dad was basically living in, the environment he was living in, had all these weapons detonated, all these experiments done, and a lot of these were dispersal experiments. So the nuclear debris was scattered around the desert, and of course you've got wind and you've got sand. So he was living in radioactive sand that was being blown around all over the place. He told me it was in his bed, it was in his foods, in his clothes, in his Land Rover. So you can't escape it. And the only protection he had were the clothes he was wearing, and these, well, they separated the contaminated land from the non-contaminated land with a single strand wire fence. And I think we all know that sand can get blown in a desert. So that was nonsensical. So I think there's no doubt my dad was contaminated and exposed to radiation. So it would help me to be able to get hold of his records. Now, I've tried several times to email and write and you get passed from pillar to post. This isn't the people to write to. You write to this person, so you send them a letter, and then eventually you start getting the answers back of no, you can't have it. We don't have the records. And the latest one I got was it basically said, we have the information that you request. It is in the scope of your, we have the information in the scope of your request, but we are withholding that medical record. It says it in black and white on MOD headed paper. They are withholding a medical record from me. And I've also done, my mum's written as well, same thing. So to my mind, that is against the law.
Have they given you any ground to say there's a reason you can't have this, that it's highly sensitive, that it's a matter of national security, that you don't have the legal right, to breach your dad's patient confidentiality, something like that?
The only reason they've given is that it would breach my dad's confidentiality, and that was it.
Right, but one of the reasons in the law that you're allowed to breach patient confidentiality is if a member of their family has a genetic condition which you might be able to help diagnose or treat as a result of looking at someone else's documentation. So it should be that Steve is able to access that. Now, if there's any nuclear veterans or member of the communities who are watching this, and if you've had any problems getting access to records yourself, have you been successful in getting access to records? Do you want to know more about it? Get into the comments and let us know how it's gone. Alan, 2 years ago, we found, this is the whole scandal is about this medical testing. And kind of 2 years ago, just to catch people up, we found this list of 150 documents that is kept at the Atomic Weapons Establishment, sort of the home of the Britain's nuclear program. It's in a secret database called Merlin. Now, this is in response to an FOI that I made asking for details of any documents they had from the weapons program that mentioned the words blood or urine. Now, at first, we just had the titles, didn't we? But, we managed to get them published. Can you just remind people how we managed to do that?
So, and some of those titles, when we got the titles, were quite shocking in the titles. And then what happened was that Andrew Murison in Parliament, we put pressure on him to actually go to the AWRE and look at these documents. And it was only through parliamentary pressure and pressure from yourselves and from us that he actually decided to go to AWRE and review these 150 documents. He went for a day, which we know that those 150 documents take a lot longer than a day. But he actually took interest in it and went and reviewed them and then released them out after reviewing them all and said, yes, these need to be released because they should not have been filed under national security. These were blood counts and blood tests for veterans and Indigenous people. And once they were released and we had time to look through them, we realized that the AWRE was holding information relating to individual blood counts. And when you look at the document just has a paper clip with a piece of paper has been put over the names, and then it's been photocopied and then released. So the names are not there, but every other detail about the person is there. These are real detailed medical records of blood tests, abnormalities in people's blood tests. Obviously came from the Gledhill memo that said that his blood had showed signs of gross irregularity, and that's what led us down that path. And those 150 documents now have led to the new records review that's being held by Al Carnes. Right.
So we'll get onto some of that, I think. So let's just try and sort of sum up where we are then. So at the turn of the year, we had the Gledhill memo that Alan mentioned. So information about the first serviceman we knew that had blood tests, Squadron Leader Terry Gledhill, who led sniff planes through the mushroom clouds, that he had gross irregularities in his blood tests. That led us to orders for blood tests throughout the RAF, throughout the air crews who are flying the sorties, then the ground crews. That led us to Army orders and Royal Navy, Admiralty fleet orders. and so on. And it just turned into just thousands and thousands of pages of information about a massive medical monitoring program that went on for more than a decade in several different locations, all about checking men for exposure to radiation. So once we had this list of 150 documents, some of which said things like this is about blood count data and blood count testing and stuff, that finally got published, and we spent some time going through it and found lots more evidence in there, which turned out to be, as Alan said, medical records in many, many cases, things that should have been in men's personnel files to help them and their doctors with any future problems they might have with their health. So once we'd seen those documents, I went back to the atomic weapons establishment and I said, have you got any more of these? Because these are quite interesting. Have you got any more? And they said, no, there's nothing beyond the documents you've got. Those 150 odd documents, they said, that's it. So, okay, I don't believe you. But it was shortly after that, I found there were at least another 200 documents, making 370 in total. And that's just the ones we know about. Which were listed very helpfully by the government itself in evidence that was provided to the Court of Appeal in 2010. So then, having got a list of some of the names of these documents, I then FOI'd those from the AWE, and they provided me with a few of them. And this Sunday, the Mirror published my report on that, and it's fundamentally just sort of stating that there is not only more documents that we weren't told about, but that the minister who went to see those first lot of documents and release them was misled because he was not informed about it. Can we just have the story up that I'm talking about while we're going through this? There we go. So the minister wasn't told about it. He then obviously didn't tell Parliament about it because he didn't know. And that means MPs too were misled. And this was the perfect opportunity, of course, when a minister is ordering a review of something to go and say, oh, look, we found this other stuff. There's other stuff here too. Should we all make it public at the same time? That did not happen. Now, so the documents that we found, they were a series of monthly pathology reports at air bases in Australia, which were used by UK and Australian troops when they were flying through the mushroom clouds. They were discussing what kind of blood tests they were available, how many were conducted, how many people were involved in those every month. There were instructions on how and when and why to take the blood tests from Australian chief medical officers to medics on the ground, and they perfectly mirrored exactly the same instructions which were coming out from the Brits to the British troops. And it was also showing that they knew, even then, I think we've got some of the examples from the files which we can show you while we're talking. They even showed that there were full awareness that radiation could have genetic effects. The one we're looking at the moment is a monthly medical report talking about a radiographer whose blood count has been raised and he's going to be taken off work as a result. Now, he's presumably carrying out x-rays at the medical base, and that's maybe why he was exposed to radiation. It does show they were checking blood counts. Elsewhere, we've got here a summary of the work carried out in the month of June 1956. They saw 11 patients. They did 4 blood counts, 4 hemoglobin counts, 1 check on eosinophils, which is a part of your blood, bacterial tests, urine tests. And this is one particular thing here now, an instruction saying that radiation is silent, unseen, and unfelt. Its presence can be made known only by means of instruments. Some of its damaging effects may not develop for some time after exposure, and some of its effects are cumulative. It shows even then that they knew exactly how dangerous radiation could be and how impossible it was to keep a check of it, unless you were taking blood tests, which would be a perfect way to keep a check on how much was going inside the men's bodies if you had the wit to do it. Now, Steve, these records that we found this time, they all relate to Maralinga, where your dad was serving. He would be subject to British rules that were exactly like this and for exactly the same reasons. How surprised are you that there is more of this to be found? How did you feel when you found that it wasn't just the 150, that there's a lot more potentially?
It's always disappointing, I think, more than surprising, because once again, not only have we battled to get as far as we have, there's still, it just proves that they're still covering up, they're still lying, there's still far more that we have to do to get all of the truth. Because from the email I got, they have my dad's record. They've basically admitted it. So how many others have they got? where is that record? Because it's not just there in a file on its own. There's going to be hundreds of thousands of them, I would assume, because there were many, many men on that base. You know, it wasn't just a couple of isolated guys out in the desert. It was a fully operational airfield with multi agencies there. So there's going to be loads of them. So for them to come out and say these are the only ones that we've got, it's rubbish. So yeah, I'm not really surprised, but I'm just disappointed that they just can't tell the truth. Basically, they won't know the truth.
Yeah, it's got you're kind of like the passive aggressive parent that just says, "I'm not cross. I'm just really disappointed in you." Now, what do you think, everybody? Are you surprised, especially those in the nuclear veteran community who might be watching? Are you surprised that the atomic weapons establishment has not told the truth at the first time of asking? Are you surprised that a minister even can't get to the truth or isn't being told the full truth when he starts asking questions about it? What does that mean for us ever getting the full truth out there? I mean, Alan, at the end of last year, you know, we went to see the Veterans Minister, Al Carnes, who you mentioned earlier. We presented a lot of this evidence to him. The Secretary of State, John Healey, after a BBC documentary on the issue, in November, he announced there'd be this internal inquiry that you referenced that Al Carnes is heading up. He's leading that work. You've met with his team several times since September for updates. What have you learned as a result? You're muted now. There we go.
The records and the records review.
Right.
We have learnt nothing, absolutely nothing in the 6 months. We have asked lots of questions around what's the scope, how many people are doing this? Is it just Fred in the basement of the MOD that's having a quick flick through? How many people? What's the budget? What's the time frame? What's the scope? When is this going to be completed? And all the answers are, we have no update for you. And Steve's at those meetings with me. And it's very frustrating that the Labour Party on this transparency still hides behind when we have regular meetings with the OVA. And I'm not having a go at the OVA staff because they are civil servants who are doing their job, but they're not getting the information back. And it's almost as if, well, we can't actually tell you that yet. We can't tell you that. So we promised Al Carnes, he asked for 6 months. The 6 months ends in March. It ends near the end of March. And we need answers at that meeting. And not just that, oh, it's still ongoing, which is what he's been saying in Parliament. I've ordered a medical records review. We are reviewing the documents. It's still ongoing. I can't give you any detail. We need the detail. We need to know. We're losing veterans every week. And we need to know exactly what's happening. And it was quite frightening at meetings that we haven't actually been asked the question, well, where did you get these documents from? Where did they come from? So that we can actually look in those places as well. So because we don't know where they're looking, how many people are looking, what the scope is, what they're looking for, we've asked the questions and we've put in what we want them to look for. It's really difficult because we're not getting the detail or the feedback or the interaction that we want.
No, so it's very much a broadcast, or they're set to receive rather than broadcast. As far as the government's concerned. Now, they're having a look into things, and that's something they need to do at whatever pace they're doing it at. But, you know, the Veterans Minister doesn't have a big budget. He doesn't have a loss of staff. So I think it's safe to assume that there's probably not a huge amount of manpower going into it, especially as there's an awful lot of other stuff going on. There's some bigger bin fires in the world that everyone's got to deal with. And so, you know, we're not quite sure maybe where the government is with things. But just to recap very quickly, I don't think we're getting very many comments today because Elon Musk hasn't paid his electricity bill because the electric comes from Canada or something, and Twitter keeps falling down today. So we're not getting a lot of stuff coming through. But if you do have any questions about what we're talking about here, get into the comments and try to let us know. We'll try to do our best to answer them for you. So at the turn of the year, things were looking relatively positive. All right, we had fresh evidence of blood testing and monitoring program. We had meetings with the minister. We had an internal review. We had a promise that within a few months there'd be some kind of answer. They were acting on things. But, you know, 6 months after that inquiry is launched, we know next to nothing about what it may have found out. Meanwhile, the Mirror has uncovered stuff and published it, which shows not just that there is evidence of blood testing, but that the information that should have been given to ministers and parliament was not. Now, the official excuse for all this, wait for this, everybody, you'll laugh when I tell you, is when I said, look, why do we have all these? I asked for all the documents about blood. We got given 150. Now I find there's at least 370 documents about blood. Now that relates to about maybe 10,000 more pages of evidence. And the official excuse was, oh, we didn't look for documents that contained the word blood. We just looked at the documents that were tagged in the AWE computer system with the word blood. And these ones you've just found, they were tagged with the word pathology. Now, you can tag things with whatever you feel pops into your head when you're busy writing the file, when you're doing the computer work, right? You could tag it pathology, you could tag it lab work, you could tag it hematology, all kinds of other things that mean blood tests. But unless you tag them all the same way or someone is overseeing it, it is possible for mistakes to happen, I suppose. But the original request was for documents that contained that word, not that were tagged with it, that contained that word. Those were the things that were said publicly, that were discussed by the minister, that were debated in Parliament, and which was not corrected by the atomic weapons establishment officials in charge of that database, who presumably should have known, if they didn't actually know, should have known there was other stuff in the system floating about that was also very similar and would have added weight to whatever it is we were reporting on. Now, even if this is an innocent mix-up, Alan, and let's give them the benefit of the doubt, okay? They've just tagged it differently. They've just tagged it wrong. This was a chance, wasn't it, for the atomic weapons establishment, which is full of upstanding, fine people who are serving their country, to say to the minister, oh, look, we do have this other stuff. It's tagged differently. Would you like to review it? It's about the same thing. It might even make you look good if you say, oh, look, we've found some other stuff and are publishing this too. It's in this database that we look at all the time. Why wouldn't they do that, Alan?
And it's actually really disappointing for us, because when we met Al Carnes, he was very much, you need to give me time. I'm a new minister. I am the new veterans minister. And I'm going, and his words to us were, I am going to do this properly. And if I do it properly, I need to have the time. But we can see that even though he's a new minister going to do it properly, the AWRE are still controlling all of this data. There is people at the AWRE that don't want this information to be put out there in transparency. And they're willing to, it's not really a lie to the minister, but it's a denial of the information. And they hide around, like you say, the tagging and the terminology. And, oh, that wasn't quite, but we mean this. And it's only when you keep digging and keep going that they are, oh, yes, we do have that data. Yes, we do have, like Steve has done. He's with his records, his father's records. He's really had to hammer it home before they said, yes, we do have it, but we're still not going to give it to you. Whereas before that, he had no, we haven't got that information. We haven't got that information. And I think that the link between the minister and the AWRE and the officials at the AWRE, this is where the big problem is. Because even though they say, like Andrew Morrison did, right, I want those files, we know that there was problems with security clearance to go and see those files, even though he was a minister. And it's this whole setup of, we created this Merlin database with thousands and thousands of documents on it. We know only, I think it's 6 people can access it because of the security clearance, the things that are in there. And then when they ask the question about what's in there, and you've asked the question, we've asked the question to Al Carnes, he asked the question and is believing what comes back rather than interrogating and actually saying to him, is this all you've got? Because I am going to Parliament and going to say this, and his recent comments show that. And it's at this level that he has been briefed and taking what the brief is rather than actually going himself, like Andrew Morrison did, and going, is this it? And even then, when he went to AWRE, somebody obviously told him, yes, this is it, to his face.
Well, this is one of the things that was discussed in the story at the weekend. Jason McHugh, who's a human rights solicitor, who is acting for the veterans in their latest legal fight, said, look, the MOD only admits to as much as the Mirror has just found out. It doesn't say we've got this other stuff. It just doesn't do that. And partly I can see how, if you are an official working in the Ministry of Defence or the Atomic Weapons Establishment, someone says, have we got 150 files about blood? You go, oh yeah, here they are. They're all tagged in the system. You could have them. And they don't necessarily think and go much further and go, have we got anything else in the system? We've got anything else tagged? Should I go further than I'm actually being asked to do? No, I'm just going to do what I'm asked. And that's that. I can see how that gets there. But the fact is, this database is locked on the grounds of national security, and the specific reasons are possible terror activity, nuclear proliferation, and problems with our foreign allies. Now, tell me, anybody, if you have the tiniest clue what a blood test for a nuclear serviceman or orders for blood tests for nuclear servicemen would do to promote counterterrorism, or to promote terrorism in some way. How could Iran possibly use that to hurt us? I don't understand. I also don't understand how it's going to upset Australia if we reveal we were checking their men to see if they were safe, because that is like the sensible thing to do, and not doing it you'd have thought would be the negligent bit, unless you've hidden the results. That would look bad. But I certainly can't see that there's a proliferation risk that someone can, from those blood tests, from the Gledhill memo, somehow manage to use that into turning into a nuclear weapon. Steve says, my dad had x-rays before, during and after the test. Both the Atomic Weapons Establishment and the Ministry of Defence say they don't have them. What's interesting with Steve's dad's medical records, and it happens to a lot of other veterans as well, is that there is a bit of paper, a sheet, a file, which says the contents, what's in this file. This is all the stuff we've got. It mentions x-rays, some of which were taken at Pearl Harbor on his way across the Pacific to Christmas Island in the 1950s. And when you actually look inside the file, the x-rays aren't there. There isn't even, as you should have, the note saying we have sent a patient for an x-ray because he's broken his leg, or we've got the x-ray back and it turns out he's only fractured it. All that kind of stuff should be in the file. It's just missing. It's just gone. It's been filleted for some reason. Paul says it's absolutely disgusting. We lost my dad last year. Oh, Paul, he was a medic on Christmas Island in Operation Grapple. There's so much underhanded stuff going on. I'm sorry to hear about that, Paul. And I should point out that the medics who were working at various levels on this are not part of the scandal. Yeah. Whatever blood tests they did or did not do, whatever orders they did or did not have, it was reasonable to do those checks. It was reasonable to follow the orders that you were given, believing that your superiors were looking after you.
Yeah. I think it's important, Susie, just to point out that the Merlin database, people might think that this database was created in the 50s and 60s, but it wasn't. It's a very recent database. Yeah,
it started being built in 2007, and it wasn't built to hold the recipe for nuclear weapons. It was built to hold information relevant to personal injury because of a court case that was going on at the time. There should never be any national security implications to any of the stuff on there whatsoever. Richard says whoever is the curator of that system might as well be replaced by the janitor. Any database person would look more widely than the single request. You just can't get the staff. They probably do have some cutbacks at the AWE, but they are still getting 20 billion to build the new facilities for the new Trident missile. So they could probably recruit 1 or 2 people. And interestingly, I would just say as well, Alan and I have both offered to go and tell them how we found the stuff we found.
Yep.
So that, because it is possible sometimes to look at a medical record or some other complicated document and go, well, this seems to be okay. For example, the minister saw Steve Foot's dad's records and said, you can have that. And I've looked at it and there's nothing in there you need to worry about, because he didn't know about the x-ray thing, and he didn't look at the contents page and then check it against the actual contents. So we've offered to go and help. And if there's anybody who needs a pointer, I'm sure they don't want me inside the Ministry of Defence telling them what to do, but I'd love to do it. And we have said, look, there's a degree of expertise. We're happy to go and tell you how we found it, and then you can use that to help if it helps.
And at our last meeting with the OVA, we did that. We said we would be part of whatever you need us to sign, whatever you need us to do, we will help you with this process. We would be part of this whole process in order to get this done right this time. There was almost silence on the thing of, I don't know how we're going to do that, how we would incorporate you in. There's obviously security clearances, and the instant like rebuttal of it.
Yeah. Even though there should be security clearances, blah, blah, see the Merlin database, there's nothing in there, which is remotely national security. There's plenty of personal data, and I'm sure they'd want us to sign forms about, not releasing some of that. And obviously, wouldn't let me anywhere near it because they can't trust journalists. But I could tell them what they sort of thing they ought to look for. Anyway, Steve, we are a few weeks away now from the 36th anniversary this April of the Hillsborough disaster, which is a date when the Prime Minister promised to present to Parliament a bill forcing a duty of candour on all public officials, basically to make them tell the truth, in effect, or face going to jail. Right? There was no option to lie. And I'll give one example of this. So in the original Hillsborough scandal, there were junior police officers who were writing down the truth in their statements about what happened at Hillsborough, and who had senior officers come in, rip it up and stand over them and make them write the version that the police wanted to put out. Now, the duty of candour on public officials protects those people at the bottom of the heap from being bullied by the above, right, who've got reputations and institutions to protect. It is a very valuable thing. It means that person at the bottom can say, no, I cannot lie. I cannot lie because I'll get in really big trouble. And it gives them a reason to tell the boss to sort off, right? It's a valuable thing to do. Now, you're part, Steve, of this Hillsborough Law campaign group, along with victims of things like contaminated blood, Grenfell, multiple other scandals as well. How much weight and hope are all those families investing, I suppose, in this law that when it arrives, it will finally bring an end to this kind of practice of, whether benignly or malignly, covering things up, looking after the institution, honest mix-ups maybe, that, everybody is suffering as a result of?
Yeah, I mean, the Hillsborough Law Now campaign has been a huge campaign. It's been so well done. And there's so many people behind it. I think they feel that, the wait is nearly over. We are going to get somewhere. And it's almost like it's the golden chalice at the end. I mean, there's obviously still some, until it comes out, you'll never know exactly what the wording is. But the real hope is that the campaign has been done, and they've been so clear in the messaging about what should be in and what we want and how we want it done, that hopefully we get it all. And yeah, it's a real big moment for the whole campaign.
So there's a huge amount being invested then really in the Hillsborough Law, and that the Prime Minister will do is he's promised at two-party conferences to actually deliver the duty of candour, public advocate, parity of legal funding and so on, so that people can fight for justice when they need to. And I imagine if he doesn't do it, all of Liverpool is going to have a really big problem with the Labour Party. So where does this go next then? There's the Hillsborough Law coming up. There's this continuing investigation, obviously, that I'm doing. But what's coming down the track? How do we expect things to unfold? Alan, you've recently been at the United Nations in New York talking about the impact of nuclear weapons, but the government sent no representative whatsoever. As my column points out today, it's those nuclear weapons that your dad and Steve's dad helped to create, which is giving our Prime Minister the right this week to jet all over the world, holding summits, trying to get people to the table to talk about peace in Ukraine. It's keeping Vladimir Putin at arm's length on the other side of Europe, which is where rather he was. Are you going to try to? Where do we go from here? If the government, if he won't even send anybody to hear about the impact of nuclear weapons, but yet he's going to rely on them all the time, what's the next step? Are you going to have to try to meet Keir Starmer in person again? How are you going to move this on?
Well, it was really disappointing from our point of view that they didn't even send an observer, as they call them, which is just an official to go and listen to the third meeting of state parties of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, because there were some fantastic people there. From all of the affected communities, but also from the British nuclear test in Australia. There were Aboriginal people there. There were people from Kiribati, and the chair, one of the co-chairs of the TPNW, is from Kiribati, from Christmas Island, and we even was invited to a meeting with the UNA Association to meet with the UK mission. And they cancelled that meeting due to illness. So we are at a stage where the civil society voice and the impacted communities is not being heard. There is lots of obviously political things with the AUKUS deal, the US, Australian and the UK for the submarine deal that you mentioned earlier, that stops them going to the TPNW and signing the prohibition of nuclear weapons because they then got an AUKUS deal. But you could still send an observer to talk to us. And one of our biggest problems is that in opposition, Keir Starmer was very, 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 very supportive of us. We met Steve, met you, we met me, and he really was supportive of us. But now he's as Prime Minister, getting to him is the difficult part. It's deflected wherever we try. It's deflected. And that's the key thing. It needs this political pressure and this man to say, actually, no, we need to listen to these people. Because when you listen to them, I spoke for 8 minutes at the UN and there was deadly silence because these people haven't heard these stories before. They're politicians and bureaucrats and diplomats, and they don't get this lived experience. They don't get that in their normal. So when somebody comes to them with the lived experience, they go, oh my God. And that's what we need. And we need another, oh my God, this is really, really affecting people right now. And we need to do something about it. We can't just keep kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, it's sort of the thing where I think, in opposition, the Labour Party under Tony Blair was quite supportive. The Conservatives, when Blair was in power, were quite supportive, and Gordon Brown. And then again, when it tends to be in opposition, they will say stuff. And then in power, they say something different. Now, Steve, I think there will be a lot of people who are quite cynical who'll be watching this and saying, well, that's just politicians for you. They say one thing and then do another and blah, 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 blah. As part of this campaign, you've met quite a few of them. You've met Keir Starmer. You've said to me many times that, he took you aside and said, as a dad, I totally get how you feel and I totally understand. And he impressed you, I think, with his authenticity, his genuine response to you. What do you think this change of heart once in government, which isn't political, it seems to happen to every party, what do you think it's down to?
I think it's possibly not the fault of Keir as such, but I think he's being controlled by the MOD. I think that the MOD has far, far greater power than we perhaps imagine. It's a civil servant. It's the tail wagging the dog. At the end of the day, they're probably saying you can't afford to deal with the nuclear test veterans. You can't do this. We can't have this information coming out. You've got to distance yourself, sweep them under the carpet, which is, at the end of the day, what's happening all over again. Yeah,
it's where nuclear veterans have been for some time. When the new government took office last July, nearly a year ago now, I remember an old Tory saying to me, well, civil servants are going to run the country for the next 18 months because the ministers don't have enough experience. They don't know quite how to say, no, I don't agree with that guidance. I want to do something different. They don't push back in the same way. They tend to do what the officials around them tell them because, you're new in a fresh job and someone who already works there says, well, this is the rule and this is how we do it. And you think, oh, I'm not allowed to do anything different. This is fine. I'll do what everyone else is doing. And that's when you get sort of a government that's sort of a bit stuck inside itself, which is perhaps where we are. So if anyone watching this has any bright ideas about how we get to Keir Starmer, because the only way we got the medal for the veterans a few years ago was by going to see the Prime Minister. We obviously clearly need to get to the top of the tree again. And we are going to hopefully have a meeting with Al Khan's to catch up on and hear some news from him, we hope. Towards the end of the month. We're hoping there's going to be some kind of a meeting and an update, in which case we will, of course, update you with what's happening. But if anyone's got any bright ideas about how we get to the Prime Minister, short of actually abseiling into Downing Street, and I'm prepared to try that if anyone's got a helicopter, let us know. Steve, how do you expect things to unfold over the course of the next sort of few months? We've got a legal case that's still bubbling away. It's probably due to issue a claim. There's, there's obviously other issues as well. There's Hillsborough Law. Are you hoping that it's going to come out positively, or how do you expect it to go?
The optimist in me says, yes, we will make some progress. I think that the pressure is being applied, and it's not diminishing. So we're doing good, and we've got the Mirror stories coming out regularly, which is great. We've got parliamentary backing through some great MPs, and we've got the Hillsborough Law around the corner. And I hope that is enough that we can start saying, well, we've got Hillsborough Law now. We're going to ask you this question, and you've got to answer us, basically. So yeah, the optimist says, it should be good. But then there's the other side which says we've been optimistic before, and they always find a way around your optimism to sweep you under the carpet again, to pull those cloaks over and basically keep everything hidden. So I'm going to stick with the optimistic side for now. But
you're a bit pessimistic about it. It sounds like.
Yeah.
And you've got a podcast coming out as well, haven't you, Steve? What's it called?
It's in the blood.
It's in the blood. So if you can search for that, when's it? Is it going to be out soon?
April.
We're going to start preparing it and hopefully recording the first one next month.
Okay,
so
fantastic.
We're just in the sort of design and production process at the moment.
All right, okay. So keep your eyes out for that one, everybody. It's in the blood, which will be about the nuclear veterans scandal. Alan, what do you expect out of the next few months? What can people look forward to, if anything?
One of the areas that I'm a little bit disappointed with, after personal comments made to me, is with the Secretary of State for Defence. I do believe that John Healey could do more where he is, in terms of access to Kia, and in the way that he obviously is the boss of Al Khan's in the tree, and that he controls the Ministry of Defence as the minister. And I would hope that he would meet with us and say, look, I'm meeting you, you've meeting with Al, but I'm going to give some guarantees about this. And that is what we need. We need him, like he did before, and then maybe go up to Keir. But with John Healey as Secretary of State for Defence, the way he is with the MOD, he's been in, like you said, we've got 6 months we're in now. It's a really, it's a demanding role. And I appreciate we're just one item on the agenda. But we need to get higher up that agenda so that he meets with us. I am still positive and optimistic because of the legal case, because that sits in the background and it's ready to go. And we need to be able to go, right, we've given you the 6 months. This is what's happening, but we're not satisfied with that. If we get to the meeting and go, actually, I still need another 18 months to do this. It's much bigger than I thought. That's no good. We lose veterans every week. They'll all be gone. So we need to then decide and go, actually, okay, well, if you don't do this, we are going to submit this legal action.
Yeah. And as we've just seen in the news in the past couple of weeks, the British military budget does not have the £5 billion spare that it's been estimated this legal case will cost. It needs that money to rearm, to defend Ukraine, to watch out for Vladimir Putin coming in on the eastern borders. It is not money that Keir Starmer has splashing about. He can just go, go away. I'll speak to you after you've won your court case. It's not going to happen. So they're going to have to find a way through it in some way. And as I said in my column today, I think for maybe a few £100,000 to put some staff and resource into Al Khan's review. Sorry, someone just ringing me. But a few £100,000 to put some resource into that review, and maybe, a public statement or a letter from the Prime Minister to the atomic weapons establishment saying, cooperate, lads. That would do it. I think that would move things on and maybe get quite a nimble review and maybe some answers in a few months.
That wasn't Keir Starmer phone.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't anybody. It was somebody else about a story. The next nuclear veterans story, actually. But I think for a very short amount of money, and we could get some answers, but it's a case of getting that message through to the right people, which we will, of course, try to do. So we have Parliament is going to be recessing shortly for April, but it's got lots of questions from supportive MPs on all sides of the House there. We can expect some more debates, especially about these missing records, which we have now found. There will be more records coming out as well. All right. The Mirrors investigation doesn't go anywhere. And there is plenty more to find. There's 28,000 documents on that database, and I'll be buggered if I don't get them all in the end. So there would be more being uncovered every day. But any pressure, you can bring anybody to your MPs, to if you see Keir Starmer anywhere, give him a nudge, tell him to do something about it. Watch this space. More is being uncovered every day, and we're not going to give up or go away. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Steve, for joining us. Alan, you can go and have a rest now. And we will see you again on Wednesday at our normal time of 9 a.m. for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, everybody, stay safe, take care. Tatty bye.